In a couple of minutes here. Sorry, Ken.
Oh, you have specific assigns?
Yes,
okay.
Sorry.
All right.
And another. Take that. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
My name is Kelly Bovio, and I serve as District Director to Congressman Moulton. We're really excited to have you all here with us today. We're proud to be in Lynn, a place where the city truly meets the sea. And there's so many artistic, cultural, culinary, historical, and natural gems to be found here. I'm thrilled to be in Lynn. We're also honored to have with us Mayor Jared Nicholson. Mayor Nicholson is the 59th mayor of the city and took office in January of 2022. He is focusing on delivering inclusive growth through better schools, better jobs, better housing, better infrastructure, and a more compassionate and understanding city. We thank the mayor and his team for hosting us here today. We couldn't have pulled this off without you all, so thank you very much. May I introduce Mayor Nicholson.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the City of Lynn. Welcome to the Council Chamber. I'd like to thank my colleagues on the council for allowing us to use their beautiful space. And I'd like to thank Congressman Moulton for hosting us and having us here. Thank you, Congressman Moulton. Housing is a top issue for our community. It's a top issue for the Commonwealth. It's a national issue. It's certainly one that requires a regional approach. And so very grateful for Congressman Moulton for spearheading that and this discussion today. For the City of Lynn, almost half our residents in the city are cost burdened by housing, paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And it's a incredible challenge for all of us to try to make progress on that. It's certainly something that my administration and my colleagues on the council have really prioritized. We were able to pass and implement an inclusionary zoning ordinance just a few weeks ago in this chamber that's already starting to create units and funds for housing. We made some really substantial investments through the American Rescue Plan Act, and so thank you again to Congressman Moulton and the federal delegation for making that possible, and are taking every opportunity we can find creating public housing, affordable housing on publicly held land as well. Have a couple projects going there. We are incredibly grateful for the amazing work that the Lynn Housing Authority and Neighborhood Development does on all these issues. We have a representative, Jeff Whedon, here from Lynn Housing. Very grateful for all that work, along with so many community partners. This is an issue that is, as you will be discussing, not an easy one and requires not just collaboration across the region, but collaboration across sectors. And so we're very grateful to be part of an ecosystem that is looking to step up to that challenge to make sure that as we do grow in Lynn and take advantage of the opportunities that we have here, we're doing everything we can to help our residents who are here now be able to afford to stay and tackle some of the really inequitable and dangerous conditions that exist in some of our housing stock around the city, which has been a priority as well. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for the insight that you are about to share and the collaboration that I'm sure will result from this discussion. And would also like to thank Congressman Moulton again, who's been a leader on this issue. And, just really grateful for him stepping up to that regional collaboration role. And thank you for being here today, Congressman Moulton.
Mayor, thank you very much. And a warm thank you to you and everyone who's made possible our gathering in Lynn today. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm thrilled to have Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, HUD Regional Administrator Juana, Matias, and all of our esteemed speakers who are joining the program today. While the list is far too long, I also want to recognize the many state and local elected officials who are here for this important conversation. We need to work together across party lines and all levels of government to solve this problem. We're here this morning because Massachusetts is facing a housing affordability crisis, and the old playbook just isn't working. The rising cost of housing has left residents struggling to pay rent, let alone purchase a home. Today, 1 in 4 American households spends more than half of their income on housing costs. 1 in 4. Having a safe place to live is a basic human right, but for many of our constituents, it doesn't feel that way. Housing costs are a major factor in why people are now leaving Massachusetts. Before the pandemic, a family making $100,000 a year could afford to buy 37% of homes available in the state. Today, that same family can only afford about 12% of the homes across Massachusetts. From April 2020 to July 2022, 110,000 more people moved out of the Commonwealth than into it, one of the highest rates of so-called domestic out-migration in the country. There's a direct line between housing loss and job loss, between mental health and physical health. For children, housing instability can negatively impact their development, health, and school performance. Investing in housing, therefore, means investing in all these things, investing in people, which lowers costs in turn for everyone else. This is a local, state, and a federal challenge, and we need both immediate crisis relief and longer-term solutions to create a more sustainable future. This fiscal year, I was proud to secure $1 million for the Haven Project's Catalyst Housing Program towards establishing a new supportive housing program for low-income adults right here in Lynn, and $1 million for Lifebridge to expand homeless shelters in Salem and Beverly. And I'll continue working with our community partners, many of whom I see in the audience, to do everything we can locally. It's hard to imagine how much worse this problem would be without everything you make happen every day. The federal government has done important work on housing too, but the share of spending on housing has stagnated at low levels for decades. The HUD budget declined by 40% between 1976 and 2002, and has since stayed at only about 2% of overall spending. It's no wonder we have problems with inventory and affordability. I'll continue to push for increases in funding for our federal housing programs, but let's be honest, in today's political and fiscal situation in Washington, we're not going to dramatically reverse these decades-long trends. We have to try different approaches. So before we get to our expert speakers, I want to share a few perspectives, just a few ideas on where we might need to go on housing affordability, which I hope will serve as a jumping-off point for the discussion and debate. First, we have to do a better job at addressing the simple economics of supply and demand. We need to build more housing, and it must be accessible to where people want to work. Building density in our cities and towns makes not just housing, but life in those communities more affordable and sustainable, not to mention creating more vibrant places to live. So zoning is critical. Much credit goes to the Baker administration for taking on this political football, and I'm encouraged to see the continued leadership on this, particularly from Andrea Campbell. Second, another political football is rent control, though honestly there seems to be a lot of groupthink on this lately. A long investigative piece in the Boston Globe recently put the blame on legislators who are landlords for not supporting rent control, without a single sentence devoted to the basic facts about rent control, including the fact that almost every single living economist opposes it. We should be having this debate, and I emphasize debate, because any student of housing policy knows that while rent control sounds great, to even say it has a mixed legacy is generous at best. The goals of rent control are admirable, to create tenant stability and prevent rent from rising to unaffordable rates. But reality is quite different. Reduced construction, deterioration of housing stock, and reduced mobility, which of course is the opposite of what we need. San Francisco has some of the strictest rent control in the country and the worst housing crisis. One study showed that in response to rent control in San Francisco, landlords reduced rental housing supplies by 15% by selling to owner-occupants and redeveloping buildings. Now, if there's anyone who can figure out how to design a rent control program that actually achieves its desired outcomes, it's Michelle Wu. I'm a big fan of the mayor, and I know she's working hard to get this right for the city of Boston. But whatever that complex economic equation is, it must not lose sight of the very first principles of Economics 101, supply and demand. If rent control reduces supply by making the market less likely to build, we'll be moving backwards. Finally, there's a huge piece of this puzzle that not enough people are seriously talking about. The MBTA is an epic mess, and housing is the #1 issue in Massachusetts. What we all need to better understand is the intimate connection between the two. There actually is a fair amount of affordable housing in Massachusetts, but it's not near or accessible to the competitive jobs people want. Better, faster transportation is the solution. And that means not just building more housing around existing transportation hubs, we should also be creating entirely new ones. We did this for most of the 20th century, creating more housing opportunities for the wealthy and middle class by building publicly subsidized highways to lush suburban communities. You might say that we all paid to improve access to unaffordable housing. Now it's time to improve access to more sustainable and affordable housing throughout the Commonwealth. Transforming our 19th century commuter rail system into a 21st century regional rail system to enable us to all get around the Commonwealth, not just into and out of Boston at rush hour, but around the Commonwealth faster than driving. And that's key. It must be faster than driving to make it worthwhile. That would be truly transformative for the job and housing markets in the region. Today, you can't live in Salem or Lynn and work on the South Shore, or vice versa. I've been to California more times in the past year than I've been to the South Shore. True story. I'm sure there are a few of you in the audience who can say the same. The best example of this is East-West Rail. If you build East-West Rail to 19th century standards, as the MBTA currently plans, and that's not an exaggeration, the MBTA wants to build East-West Rail to 19th century standards, the same speeds that trains traveled over a century ago. If you build to that standard, it will not make a dent in housing or traffic. But if you could get to Springfield in under an hour from downtown Boston, as you can on rail systems literally all over the world, then the housing options for the people of the Commonwealth would be transformed overnight. It would provide the single biggest solution to the housing crisis in eastern Massachusetts, and by the way, transform the economy of western Massachusetts in the process. Just as the market responded to decades of highway building at much greater taxpayer expense than building high-speed rail, by the way, by building sprawling, expensive, and unsustainable communities accessible only by car, the market will respond to fast rail access by building denser, walkable, more vibrant, and sustainable downtowns. Fly to Washington, as I do every week, and you can pick out the metro stations from the air because of the tall buildings surrounding each one. A recent study of the new Beijing to Shanghai high-speed rail line showed that it has already reduced regional inequality by 25%. The bottom line for us today is that if what we've been doing to date were good enough, we wouldn't be in this crisis. The point of today's forum is not just to pat ourselves on the back for what we've done and pretend we can solve this problem by continuing to bang our heads against the wall, but rather to have debates that spawn new ideas, new approaches, and force us to confront the reality of our failures as well as our successes. Traditional housing policy alone is not going to solve this crisis. Thanks again for being here, and now I'm happy to introduce HUD Regional Administrator Juana Matias. Regional Administrator Matias is responsible for overseeing HUD operations, coordinating agency activities with other federal programs, and administering federal housing assistance throughout New England. She previously served as the COO of Mass Inc. and as state representative for the 16th Essex District. Juana was the first Latina immigrant elected to the Massachusetts House, and during her tenure sponsored critical legislation, including bills to stimulate the production of new affordable housing. I've had the honor to work with Juana for many years, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today. Thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, if we plan to tackle our housing challenges, we need a little bit more energy than that. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go, there we go. Thank you for the warm welcome. I am delighted to be here today for this important discussion, and I want to start by thanking Congressman Moulton for convening us today, for his public service to this district, this region, our Commonwealth, and our country. Delighted that we're going to be joined shortly, I believe, by Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll. She is a true housing champion. We are lucky to have her commitment and leadership on this issue at this critical juncture. Our sincere gratitude to Mayor Nicholson for hosting us today, and our amazing state, nonprofit, private sector partners for being an ongoing resource to our Commonwealth's housing needs. A special thanks to my HUD team, who every day help advance our HUD mission across the state and New England. And on behalf of the Biden administration and HUD, I want to thank every stakeholder in the room for all you do and want to do to address the record number of families and individuals that are confronting housing insecurity. A combination of redlining, discriminatory housing policies and practices have led to our present-day housing instability and are a direct cause of the growing racial wealth gap. It is a hard truth to swallow, but one we must confront. Today, housing in America and our Commonwealth is less affordable than at any time in modern history. For decades, there's been a large and long-standing gap between the supply, as Congressman Moulton said, and demand of affordable homes for renters and homeowners, and particularly for people of color. In the 6th Congressional District, data shows that the median current average rent during quarter one of this year was $2,500, up 6% from the same period a year ago. And your most recent vacancy rate was recorded as being the lowest first quarter rate since 2017. And these challenges are not unique to your region. Look, we know that housing is the foundation of everything we do. At its core, housing is about people. It's about families, community, equity. Where people live, and especially where children grow up, is critical to long-term well-being, including life expectancy, health, and income. Housing facilitates building strong, inclusive communities. It allows us to sustain our workforce and to remain competitive. It's a pillar of the American dream. But we cannot do the hard work of solving our housing issues in silos. It will take the collective action of all sectors to meet the need. And HUD is just a part of a very necessary whole community approach to housing. It will take entities at the federal, state, and local level, nonprofit, our private sectors, working together to solve our housing challenges. Together, through cross-sector collaboration, we can advance inclusive housing and zoning practices and policies. We can invest greater public and private dollars, incentivize production, and do away with archaic local policies that obstruct housing development and exclude people from quality housing. The Biden administration is committed to helping ensure that suitable housing is available for all Americans. The administration has implemented a multi-pronged housing approach with unprecedented investments in preservation, increasing rental assistance, affordable housing production, expanding access to home ownership, ending and preventing homelessness, and ensuring we are investing in inclusive community development. We have seen record-level funding in this administration in home ARPA, continuum of care, special vouchers, additional allotment of housing choice vouchers, new funding for elderly housing production and neighborhood revitalization through our choice neighborhood programs. HUD's proposed funding in fiscal year 23 includes a total of $58.2 billion, an increase of $4.5 billion above fiscal year 22. Expanding homeownership remains a fundamental priority of Secretary Fudge and the Biden administration, as this is a key vehicle to increase intergenerational wealth building. Last month, FHA announced a 30 basis point decrease in mortgage insurance premiums. And finally, something this administration has made a priority is advancing economic justice and asset building for those we serve. The administration's Bridging the Wealth Gap agenda is working to expand asset building opportunities for renters through increased savings, banking, credit history improvements, and continued support for our family self-sufficiency, Jobs Plus, and Ross programs. This administration's budget is a value statement that invests in Americans at every station in life, from those seeking to purchase a home to those who receive HUD rental assistance, and will ensure families across the country can live in communities that are safe, affordable, and resilient. When we work together to leverage resources at all levels, in all sectors, we can solve complex problems and improve people's lives. With quality housing, access to health care, workforce, childcare, and economic growth. As public servants, we must continue to measure success by getting it right for the people we serve, for those most vulnerable and in need. Our HUD New England team looks forward to continuing to be a steady partner to you all as we continue to make government work on behalf of those we serve. Thank you. Now that I've given you a quick overview and highlights of what the Biden-Harris administration and Secretary Fudge have been doing, I'd love to just demonstrate our commitment and investments in the 6th Congressional District. As you can see from this first slide, this shows our investments between fiscal year 21 and 22, about $7 billion of dollars received for all of Massachusetts. And you can see that the majority of those dollars are in our housing programs. That's our project-based HAP contract under multifamily, and also public housing, about $3.6 billion in public housing and $2.4 billion when it comes to our housing programs, which is our multifamily side of the HUD house. What does that mean in terms of the 6th Congressional District? A total investment of $176 million. We currently have about 11,500 hard units where families are residing in the 6th Congressional District. And many forget, yes, public housing, yes, rental assistance, but we're also in the business of making people home owners. And so when you look at our FHA program, you can see we had 511 first-time home buyers. Of those 511, 178 were people of color. The administration has also been very innovative. I think that Congressman Moulton pointed to the fact that we can't continue to do status quo work. And so some of the initiatives that are being rolled out that have requested additional funding in the budget are the following. The first is Yes in My Backyard. This is a new initiative that is going to reward, on a competitive basis, communities and localities that are advancing inclusive zoning and land use policies. So more to come on that program. It is a competitive program, but communities will be able to receive dollars for advancing inclusionary zoning in their communities. Our Housing Supply Action Plan was released in May of 2022, and that initiative is aiming to close the housing gap within the next 5 years through new financing tools and through rewarding communities, again, that are centering inclusionary zoning in their work. Next slide. Our Thriving Communities and Technical Assistance Program is a new initiative. If you are an urban community, need technical assistance, this program will provide you with support and experts to kind of not just think about your housing plan, but to think about your infrastructure plan and how does housing play a part in that, in conjunction with transportation's needs. So if you're a community, you need support, you need some technical expert in creating a plan for what you'd like to do in terms of housing production, reach out to us. This is an active grant currently that's open at HUD. And then last but not least, our Office of Policy Development and Research is always available to any community. We do market analysis. We can help you kind of review your data locally and understand what are the needs so that you have a plan that can meet the challenges that you are confronting. So please reach out to us. That's an open-ended support that we have at HUD. And then what has this administration been doing? I think I mentioned in my remarks, it's been a multi-pronged approach. We're investing in unprecedented ways when it comes to rental assistance, home ownership, homelessness. For the first time ever, HUD changed their fair market rents. It was the biggest complaint that I would get as I traveled across the region. Your vouchers aren't competing with market rents in the private market. So we use private data. We hope that Congress and our congressional delegation will ensure that we can continue to sustain the increases we saw. New England saw a 10% increase in our fair market rents for our voucher program. So that was transformational, and we hope that we continue to implement that. On home ownership, I mentioned the FHA 35-point decrease. We're also looking at rental history as a way to measure credit worthiness, which has been a new initiative, and all hands on deck in terms of homeless assistance. We know that about 18,000 people in Massachusetts are homeless, and so a lot of investments in our continuum of care programs, ESG, our emergency solution grants, stability vouchers. We just saw the state of Massachusetts receive $110 million for homelessness, and 226 projects will be receiving funding. But the crux of my presentation is really, what are the tools under our portfolio at HUD that can be leveraged for new, affordable, mixed-income housing production? And this is an area that I feel sometimes, yes, our public housing authorities are well aware of them, some aren't. When it comes to our Office of Public Housing, there are two key products that can be leveraged for new production. And I want to do a disclaimer. It's fact-specific. There are limitations, and this is also statutory. So if you're a public housing authority or a nonprofit developer or even just a developer and you have questions, please follow up with us because it is very fact-specific. But two projects or two tools that we have are the project-based vouchers. 20% of your housing authority's vouchers can be leveraged and placed into a new development. And I will show you an example at the end of this presentation where that was done. If you're interested in doing that, please reach out to our office, and our director, Bob Suika, can walk you through that. Our rental assistance demonstration program, it allows public housing authorities to preserve public housing, but also leverage private and public equity to rebuild and recapitalize. You can do a one-to-one conversion and add additional units, and also make these living environments mixed income, which we know has great impacts. So those are two very key tools that can be leveraged under our public housing program. When it comes to our Office of Multifamily, a lot of people aren't aware of it, but we have a lot of finance products, our 221D4 for new construction and substantial rehabilitation. Our Section 202, we just released a funding opportunity. It's called a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, and that's to build elderly housing. Was just released. The deadline passed. We hope to see that the federal government continues to make funding opportunities, not just for the Section 202, but 811, that's housing for people with disabilities. So those are some of the toolkits in our multifamily portfolio. And last but not least, if you're a director of community development in a entitlement community, you're aware of these programs. When it comes to our annual grants, our community development block grants can be leveraged for housing production. Our home investment partnership program, again, this program's main purpose is to build affordable housing, and you will see that you use this in your lighthouse projects here. And not only do entitlement communities or participating jurisdictions receive these dollars, but DHCD receives these dollars. And so you can leverage local dollars with state dollars so that you do a blending of financing and are able to make a project work. All of our notice of funding opportunities can be found here. I believe this PowerPoint is going to be provided as a follow-up to all participants. Coppet Hill Apartments, perfect example of our Section 542 risk sharing with mass housing. It also has RAD in it. And last but not least, the lighthouses, Salem, Mass. You can see the blending of resources here. State income tax credits, LIHTC. You see 8 project-based vouchers, right? That's the project basing of our vouchers that I mentioned. They came from actually DHCD, so it wasn't from the Salem Housing Authority. You see also our $825,000 home grant, leveraging all resources available, private, public, to make sure that these deals work. And this is a mixed income development that I think will be ready to be welcoming new residents very soon. So that's a little bit about us, the toolkits that we have that can aid in affordable housing, mixed income production across the state. We look forward to being an ongoing partner to you all. And now it is my pleasure to introduce someone who's now on round 3 of doing these events with me, Ken Willis. He is the Senior Vice President of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, oversees the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston's community investment programs. He also serves as the key liaison between the bank's advisory council and regulatory agencies, community partners, and affordable housing organizations. With nearly 3 decades of experience, Ken is a leader in New England's affordable housing and community development industry. Help me in welcoming Ken.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for those kind words, Regional Administrator Matias. And I do want to thank the Congressman Seth Moulton for inviting me here today, and the mayor. And Federal Home Loan Bank is, excuse me, is probably not something that everyone in this room is familiar with. So I'm really here to kind of give you this perspective from a private perspective in terms of housing and economic development. So I've got some slides. I think a couple of key words I heard were sort of leverage and private sector partners. And so I want you to think about the Federal Home Loan Bank as a private sector partner that is deeply engaged in affordable housing and economic development. But it's not a common name that most folks would be familiar with unless you're in the banking industry, or perhaps you're a congressman and you understand the role of the bank. So I want to really introduce us as a key player in this field, go through some of the programs, and then I'll answer some questions at the end. So I've got some slides, and here's the clicker. Okay, great, thank you.
What you see here is what you see.
Okay, beautiful. So just quickly, Federal Home Loan Bank is a system of wholesale banks that essentially provide liquidity to the banking sector. And again, not a sort of a common name for most folks. We don't have ATMs or checking accounts, but we play a critical role not only in the banking system, but also with affordable housing and economic development. So with that, we have a dual purpose mission. One is liquidity, to the extent that banks need financing and funding to manage their balance sheets so that they can continue to lend, make small business loans, make residential loans. We're there for them so that they continue that behavior and that activity. Secondarily, we do a lot in the space of affordable housing and economic development. In fact, the banks collectively, there are 11 federal home loan banks. We all allocate 10% and sometimes greater than that of our earnings to support affordable housing to a specific program called the Affordable Housing Program. Many of the folks may have participated in this program. And when you saw sort of the examples of the projects with, LIHTC funds and HUD funding, we're part of that capital stack, right? Because we know there is not enough funding, there is a supply and demand, but there's also a cost issue, right, in terms of building these homes. And so we provide that private source of funding to be able to do that. So again, who we are and what we do. I mentioned this liquidity function. Folks are familiar with some of the recent bank failures over the last couple of weeks with Silicon Valley and other banks, Signature Bank, Silvergate Bank. We actually provided liquidity upon those events at record amounts over the last couple of weeks so that other banks were really shoring up their balance sheets so that they can continue to lend. And so that's an important liquidity function that we play. Do a lot of work with community banks. We are a cooperative, so our customers are other banks, so community banks, credit unions, CDFIs, but we really do support the smaller community bank that in some cases doesn't have access to capital markets, excuse me, or critical financing. We're there for them for that. And then I mentioned kind of the sort of how we backstop the banking system, which is a critical function. So I really want to focus on the public-private partnership. Again, we heard over and over again this morning that, cross-sector collaboration, leveraging of funds is key in building these units of affordable housing. So everything that we do at the bank is accessed through one of our member financial institutions. So I mentioned credit unions, community banks, larger banks, CDFIs, community development financial institutions. All of our funding is accessed through one of those individual institutions. So you can't walk into a Federal Home Loan Bank and say, I want to apply for $500,000 for affordable housing. But what you can do is work with your local community banker who is there to really assist the community anyways to access this funding. These programs, again, support affordable housing and economic development. I'll dive into those a little bit more in a second. And they're really discounted, and I really want to focus on that. They could be layered with other programs, but what we're providing is a subsidy to our members who can then pass that subsidy on to you, the developer. So I've got a suite of programs. I'm not going to dig into all the details because we'll be here all day. Some of them are statutory, some of them are voluntary based on the bank's mission to support affordable housing and economic development. But I think the one that most folks are familiar with is our affordable housing program. And again, collectively, the Federal Home Loan Bank system allocates billions of dollars each year to affordable housing. The Boston Bank is just one of 11 regional banks, as I mentioned, and we've got some project caps. So we can provide up to $1.2 million in capital money, so that helps you sort of offset construction costs, developer fees, and the like. But we can also provide you with interest rate subsidies. Given rates are increasing, they slowed a little bit, but still are high comparatively over the past few years. We can help you have a permanent loan on that project at a reduced rate. That allows you really to be able to leverage those vouchers and be able to make those payments for debt service. In addition to that, we have several down payment and closing cost assistance programs. Again, won't go into a lot of detail about them, but essentially they provide down payment and closing cost assistance at two sort of income stratas. So we're looking at folks at or below 80% of area median income. Again, that critical gap subsidy between the cost of, the Congressman mentioned sort of the percentage and the median sales prices of homes. We provide that critical gap funding for down payment and closing cost assistance. So we've got it at the 80% level, but we know that there's a missing middle. There are those folks who make more than the poverty level, but still need some subsidy to be able to afford a home. And so this is called our Housing Our Workforce program. Again, $25,000 for folks with incomes above 80% up to 120% of area median income. So be on the lookout for that. I want to speak a little bit about sort of small business and how important that is. The bank also supports a program called Jobs for New England. This is 0% financing that we provide to our member financial institutions, who then pass that same liquidity on to small businesses. These are your SBA 504, small businesses that you see every day in your local neighborhood, right? They're able to access this discounted liquidity so they can have sustainable debt service on the loans that they take out. And I think we all know with the small business, cash is king. So to the extent that you can have a lower debt service, the more sustainable that business is. So supporting economic development and small business development. And I do have a couple of examples here. These aren't the billions of dollars that HUD is allocating, but certainly this is the critical gap funding that we provide. And I provided this because I want to show kind of a diversity in some of the projects that we support in the public-private partnership. So in this case, we've got the North Shore Community Development Coalition, who build renovated Salem Point apartments, right? So this is a larger scale, rental development. We were able to provide $400,000 in that critical gap funding, along with other sources of funding, to make this deal happen. So that was 77 units of affordable housing. And I want to point out, again, looking at the city of Salem being a partner, looking at Eastern Bank being a partner, and also the North Shore Community Development Coalition. And then we have Harborlight House. I'm sure you'll like this one, Andrew. So this is 30 units, 30 elderly units. 22 of those units are below 30% of AMI, which is critical, right? That is really low-income housing. And then 7 of those units were for physically disabled individuals. And we talk about that as a really kind of a vulnerable class of folks that need to be supported. So AHP was able to provide $500,000, again, in this critical gap funding. It's not the billions of dollars that you're going to hear from some other sources of funding, but it is that one piece of flexible financing that does allow these deals to go forward. And again, partnering with the member bank on this case and with the community development organization, we were able to make that happen. And I think we're going to defer to the end for questions, but I thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the bank and the programs, and looking forward to partnering with everyone in this room. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken, for your comments. All right, Matias and Seth, we are running a bit behind, but we did want to give a chance for just a little bit of moderated discussion and maybe an audience question or two. With that, I'm excited to have our moderator, Mike Dean, here today. You've no doubt heard Mike's voice on GBH radio. He was previously State House news reporter. He is now with Axios, and I'm happy to turn the reins over to Mike.
Thank you so much. I want to jump right into conversation here with the three of you, because I think you do have very unique perspectives from both the private sector and then from the federal side. And I suppose, Congressman, we'll start with you as kind of the person with the widest viewpoint on this. What I want to ask all three of you, though, is what needs to happen? What absolute change needs to occur, either federally or within Congress or within people's attitudes, within the administration. It needs to happen within the next 5 years to really change this, to break the logjam and start solving this housing crisis.
Well, is this working?
I believe so.
Yeah. No, sort of, yeah? A little bit?
Yes, it is.
Is that better? Yes. All right. So I may have the widest view. I have the least expertise of the people here on the panel. But a couple of things. You know, I highlighted in my talk the intimate connection between housing and transportation. And for too long, we've just assumed that we have a housing crisis because we have a housing crisis without really looking at the root causes of that. One of those causes, of course, is zoning. And Juana and I both addressed this. Look, sometime in the early 20th century, America decided that every community should be frozen in time. And there were a lot of racial motivations for that. There's plenty of NIMBYism that always goes around. But you know, the communities around here have essentially been frozen in time since the 1920s, not since the 1820s. You know, Lynn looked very different in 1820 than it did in 1920, but it looks much the same in 2020 as it did in 1920, and that's just a problem that we have to wrestle with, right? But transportation is part of that same puzzle, where we had this massive highway building policy throughout the 20th century that unsurprisingly resulted in very sprawling suburban communities with a lot of wealthy housing. A lot of people in the middle class liked that. Wealthy class, you know, preferred it, right? But all taxpayer money went to subsidizing that kind of transportation system, which spawned that kind of housing. And in contrast to that, where you have the Lieutenant Governor is here now, so I'll make this point again. If we build East-West Rail to 19th century standards, which is literally what the MBTA plans to do, building it to 19th century standards, none of this will change. But if you have good rail access, modern rail access, then you don't need to force zoning changes down people's throats, because you will just have transit-oriented development. Naturally, the market will drive that kind of development around those transportation hubs. So I think, long answer to your question, what we fundamentally need to do is not just continue saying, oh, we need to build more housing, oh, we need to try a little bit here, a little bit there. Oh, I wish HUD would give us more money. You know, HUD would love to give you more money. The problem is Congress doesn't give HUD money.
That's right.
Fundamentally, that's just tweaking around the edges. And what we need to do is look at the root causes.
Thank you. As far as the administrative side of things, I think maybe we answered the question. Congress needs to give HUD more money. But you know, from where you're sitting, what needs to change, either federally, locally, to make things happen?
When it comes to the state level, like I mentioned in my remarks, I think we're lucky. We have new leadership that's committed to this issue. We have Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, who understands housing, has been a housing champion. So I think starting there is really important. We need to preserve every unit of affordable housing that we have. In addition to that, it's what you mentioned. It's a supply and demand issue. So production at all income levels is what's needed. And housing is a local issue. So we need to get away from NIMBYism. We need local communities to do their part and build inclusive, diverse communities. That should be the goal, where every child has access to a quality education, a community where there's clean air, clean water. And so preservation, production at all income levels. We have a homelessness situation that we need to address. That's going to require greater state investments from our legislature. We need mayors to look at their budgets and rethink about how they're investing in housing as well. And then at the federal level, we'd love Congress to give us more money. Long term, there have been disinvestment in HUD. I think there are some huge implications that sometimes people take for granted. When you change our CDBG formula, when you change the home formula, has national implications. So we're not able to accomplish much now when you bring these topics to a body that currently isn't working productively. It's hard, but we would love to see in HUD greater investments in CDBG. These formulas are outdated, decades old. Greater investments in home, because that product and program is for affordable housing production. And it's going to require everyone to come to the table and say, what aren't we doing? What could we do differently to meet not today's needs, tomorrow's needs?
Ken, same question, but from a different perspective of the private sector. either what people should change so the private sector can be more successful at this, or what does the private sector need to change?
Yeah, I think I fully support both what the Congressman mentioned as well as Juana as well. Just, we need to build more. But I do think, we do have to figure out ways of incentivizing the private sector to do more, right? So I think there were comments made earlier about sort of the pros and cons of rent control and other mechanisms. But the community-based organizations, I think, are the primary developers of housing, affordable housing. We've got to somehow figure out a way of getting some of the private developers who can scale up quickly to develop at scale, right? So we mentioned production and preservation, and the community-based organizations are doing yeoman's work in doing this. But if you get a private sector partner or you get private market to really develop and incentivize them, you can build and produce much more. So whether that's loan guarantees, additional subsidies, backstopping them, giving them opportunities maybe for vouchers. I'm on the private side, so I don't quite understand fully the HUD side of things. But certainly I think, the market will do what the market will bear. And I think, if you give them the incentives to build it, they'll build it. They're just not there.
Yeah.
And just to add, Mike, I think he brings up a really important point that has to do with our workforce. Every development that we're building gives people access to jobs. So how are we also thinking about this from the back end, and who are the developers who are getting access to these public subsidies and public dollars? Doing a better job and allowing new and emerging developers of color to access wealth through this mechanism is critically important, and we're working on a project together to help advance that. And so that also has to be a part of the discussion.
Great. We only have time for one question, so I don't know if anyone has anything really pressing. Your hand went up first. If you want to come to the microphone, that'd be great.
My name is Alexandra Lauder. I am the Community and Economic Development Planner for the town of Tewksbury. I want to appreciate all you folks for being here today. And one of the biggest issues that I face in my community when I am talking about building housing, more dense housing, is lack of infrastructure support. We're not unique in the Merrimack Valley, Tewksbury. We're along with Lowell, Tingsboro, and other communities who are struggling with sewer capacity and water capacity. And we're already in the middle of replacing decades-old piping and things like that. But this is the number one question that we face in our communities when we talk about building more housing. So is there anything that's more dedicated and focused to infrastructure support?
Happy to start with that. We were really disappointed that the infrastructure bill federally did not go through. I think that would have led to great investments. Receiving federal dollars for this, I think, is critical. Thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act, are there dollars there that can be leveraged as grants for communities to be able to implement into their projects, and also the state, right? If we expect local communities to do their part, we also need to meet communities where they're at and invest. So looking at our state budget and thinking about ways that we can invest in infrastructure as communities try to meet the need and build more mixed income housing.
We actually, we use the pandemic as a convenient excuse to send a lot of infrastructure money to communities that was largely used for water projects, for water and sewer projects. Politically, we shouldn't have to have a pandemic to be able to do that. But the point is that we recognize that this was a need. And yes, we didn't get enough of that funding in the bipartisan infrastructure, the large bill that we did pass into law. But I think that this is also a question where you can't just look to the federal government and say, okay, we're not getting as much money as we like. We have to have these conversations in local communities and have these tough conversations about, we love our town. How are we building it to be, sustainable for the future? I'm a proud resident of Salem. Over the last couple years, they've been tearing up the streets all around my house, putting in new water and sewer lines. And I'm sure that wasn't, just universally popular to do, right? But it's really important. Salem still has, or at least a few years ago, before Mayor Driscoll showed up, still literally had wooden water lines. It's pipes or whatever. Sewer. Not quite as bad. Maybe not the best for your environment if your sewer is flowing through wooden pipes that were put down like 200 years ago, right? But it takes, and think about how long those have lasted, in the ground where that community wasn't willing to take this, tackle this head on and say, this is not an acceptable level of infrastructure to leave to our kids. We're going to have to figure out how to do it, how to pay for it, even when we don't get the federal largesse that we want. That's a tough conversation. I'm sure that's hard for you to have.
And we've received some incredible federal investments. The American Rescue Plan, mayors receive significant dollars to state, and it's about how are we prioritizing those dollars to really address some of the difficult challenges we have that prevent us from building.
We can probably take one more question.
You sure? Okay. All right. Anyone, anything pressing for the panel before we let them go? In the back there, sir.
Joan from the Chamber of Commerce and also a City Council Chamber. I want to say thank you because this is really a true regional approach to solving the housing crisis. It cannot be done by each individual city and town. It has to be done on a regional basis. I want to commend all of you for being together and the community people here today. We look forward to working together with you and recognize the fact that without a regional approach, nothing will happen, including transportation, infrastructure, all the issues that affect housing. Thank you.
That was an easy question.
Hey, it was.
We'll take it.
And a good point to end on. So let's thank our panel. I think we're going to take a brief break and then hear from the Lieutenant Governor.
Hi there. If everyone could please take a seat. Our second panel is going to begin. Please take a seat. Thanks.
It's all good. Oh, hold on. This is the wrong. All right. Yeah, I just want to say once again, looking around the room, I mean, this is a great, impressive group of people, a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of people, who need to be in the same room for this conversation and debate. I emphasize debate. We've got to be willing to take on the tough issues, and I hope that's exactly what we'll do this morning. So thank you again to everybody for coming here. Thank you again to Juana, to Ken, and to Mike, of course, for a rich discussion. And let me just pause there just for a moment to let you know that Mike is going to be moderating, I guess, 2 of our panels today. Thank you very much for showing up and doing this and lending your familiar voice to the discussion. Okay. The Boston Globe called our next speaker, Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, the housing leader Massachusetts needs. As a former mayor, the lieutenant governor is no stranger to the most rough and tumble battles over housing and zoning. And against the odds, she had a lot of success. Under her leadership, Salem instituted a policy of requiring developers to include affordable units in every building, and she fought to get a policy approved that would legalize accessory dwelling units. Now that the Healey-Driscoll administration has committed itself to housing, establishing for the first time a standalone housing secretariat in the executive branch, we're certainly looking to Kim's continued leadership on this in her new role. Thank you, Kim, for being with us in Lynn today. I look forward to your continued partnership, and the stage is yours.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for shortening my first stop on the commute today, which was something I really enjoy. And I feel very much like I'm among friends, seeing so many former colleagues, partners from the City Council, many of whom also have the scars for taking on housing, and friends and colleagues from other communities. The fact that you're here, I think, really is a strong signal that you recognize and realize housing is so critical to the success of our communities, to the character of our communities. You know, Salem, almost 400 years old, has had, this rich mix of people from different places, speaking different languages, different cultures, that have made Salem their home. It's one of the things that attracted me to want to live there, to be fortunate enough to lead that great city. And frankly, a lot of our communities, that character, that something special that we like about it, frankly, a lot of it's at stake, particularly in the greater Boston area, where housing is at such a premium that the people who have lived in our communities for decades, the sorts of rich mix of people are now being challenged in terms of their ability to stay in their communities. So housing is the key to the social determinants of health. Housing is what's critical in terms of the character of our communities. And right now, we don't have enough of it anywhere. Not in Salem, not in Springfield, not in the Cape, not in southeastern Mass. All of Massachusetts is really challenged by the lack of housing at all levels. Market rate, truly supportive housing for our most vulnerable members of our community, and certainly what we call the missing middle, that workforce housing, as was mentioned earlier. Folks who are working 1, 2 jobs, make more than you need to qualify for a subsidy, but certainly don't make enough to keep up with fast rising rents. That's just not what America, and certainly what Massachusetts, was based on. If you're working your tail off, you should be able to afford to live in your community, in a community, in the community that you're servicing. And right now, far too often, that's not the case. And I'm really thrilled that we're having this discussion in this room. This is where this room, this city council chamber, and frankly, lots of local governing body rooms and city halls from Newburyport to Lawrence to, every one of our 351 cities and towns. So much of the decision-making around having housing, supporting infrastructure, working together towards that combined effort to ensure that we're not just building housing, but it's resilient and it's going to be connected to transit, and we're thinking about the land use goals for our communities. It happens in rooms just like this. And far too often, the people who are in these rooms who are influencing the policies, frankly, aren't the people who are most impacted by it. We do have a strong culture, oftentimes resisting change everywhere, right? That's part of human nature. But that has really held us back. In the last 2 decades, we have built less housing than we built in the decade before that in Massachusetts. There is currently a 200,000 housing unit gap. The good news is we're all living longer. Hooray! The bad news is there isn't enough housing to meet the current demand for people who are living here, who want to age in place with dignity in the communities they helped make so great. New people who want to come and stay in a community. I wasn't born and brought up in Salem. I came to college and never left, fell in love with the place. We have new thriving economies, folks who need to live here to work here. And we have some challenges from a competitiveness perspective that maybe you don't need to live here to work here. So we have to be really focused, both at the local level, on the state level. How are we going to tackle these challenges? The high cost of housing in Massachusetts is a real driver in what makes Massachusetts unaffordable for many, many people. That out-migration we're seeing, over 100,000 people since the pandemic have left Massachusetts. Yeah, some of that's about, life changes, but some of that's about how much it costs. High housing, high childcare makes it difficult for people to stay. And both Governor Healy and I come to these positions, these roles we're in, with a great deal of gratitude. I'm so grateful to be partnered up with someone who is a rock star, who really understands that we are not just going to talk about housing. We're not going to admire the problem. We're going to work to put in place solutions with all of you on what we can do to improve housing and livable communities. One of the first acts that we've taken on to help try and do that is the creation of this new housing secretariat, as has been mentioned. We think it's important, given that housing is the #1 issue. No matter where we are, people come up to us and talk about housing, the high cost. Even in places where housing's a little bit more affordable, when you head out to central and western Mass, it's not more affordable to the people who are living there. So we really want to put a laser focus on how we address the barriers to housing, how we partner with communities and developers, both for-profit and nonprofit developers, to build more housing at all levels, so that we can put Massachusetts in a position to keep and retain the families that we know are so key to our success. Well, that means you got to have somebody getting up every single day focused on housing. So this new secretariat is entitled the Housing and Livable Communities Cabinet. And we think it's really important that we combine those two titles. It's not just about build anything, anywhere, no matter what it looks like. Density, 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 density. Although density is your friend and we need more density. But for us, it really is a focus on trying to connect some of the earlier conversations around housing and transit, housing and infrastructure, working in partnership at the local level. Because at the end of the day, frankly, the state doesn't build housing. There's a whole lot of people, some of whom are on this stage, who build housing, particularly housing for folks who need it in our communities. And we need to be able to work with each of you at the local level and housing providers and developers on how we break down those barriers, how we find those areas that we can build in, and how, frankly, we cajole folks who there is opportunities in communities to build, and how we bring an esprit de corps, much like we had during the pandemic. Whatever it takes, we're going to get it done. And then we all went back to doing what we normally do, and to this day, we're not building the housing we need. So 200,000 housing units short in Massachusetts. We build in a good year 20,000 housing units. So do the math. That's 10 years away from catching up what we need today. We can't wait that long. People in our communities are relying on us. Anyone who hands you anything over a counter, the place you go first thing in the morning maybe to drop off your kids, or someone who's lovingly caring for an older relative, the shelves don't get stocked by themselves. The kids who are in our school have adults that need to be there too. Many of those folks can't afford to live in our communities. So this is a mission. It is mission-driven, not only key to the social determinants of health, but key to the people who we rely on, who are inextricably linked to our daily lives. That challenge is tied to housing. So this housing secretariat, which is making its way through the legislature, the Senate just approved it. And by the way, warmly received. It's going through the process. We're interviewing now for candidates to serve in that role. And we really see this as not only a cheerleader, you're going to see a lot of the governor and I talking about this, reaching out to communities, working in partnership, but also someone who can put together a comprehensive plan, working together towards identifying how do we break down barriers, how do we build more housing, and tracking it. We think the data components are really, really important as well. And the barrier piece, I'm grateful local officials are here because you know it. We see it in our own communities. I used to say to residents in Salem, some of the most sought after neighborhoods in Salem, our McIntyre Historic District, around the Common, beautiful neighborhoods. They all existed prior to zoning, and you couldn't rebuild them now because of zoning. So while we hold zoning as this Bible in our communities, and I don't want to discredit the hard work that goes into zoning, but it is not a forever tool. It needs to grow and thrive and change and alter. And when we're working together, we can ensure, as the planner from Tewksbury mentioned, how are we making sure the infrastructure is catching up? How are we thinking about the roadway improvements? Some of that needs to come from the state government, some of that we get help from the federal government, and some of that's a combination of local governments themselves. People pay for water and sewer systems in most communities. And when we put our partnership together, working towards identifying, hey, how can we do more together, we're going to see more housing. But the one caution I'd say is waiting for it all to sync up. We're going to have the perfect transportation system and then we can build housing, or we're going to get all the infrastructure taken care of and then we can start filling in. We'll never get there. We are going to have to work on a plan on simultaneous tracks to address the housing needs. We're in Lynn right now and that train station is closed. Do you know how infuriating that is? A city the size of Lynn that has a train station downtown that has ample space around it in the heart of a downtown. Some of you know this. My dad's a proud West Lynner. I've got the stories about walking down Union Street, shoulder to shoulder, right? This was the shoe capital of the world. We can't have our cities not having adequate train stations, not having adequate rail, and we're going to work on that. We've inherited a system. It's something that we're not shirking from, but it's also not going to happen tomorrow. And so we have to be committed to this joint effort that we're going to invest in the transit, we're going to invest in the infrastructure, and we're going to work together to identify that. But we can't put off all the housing until everything's perfectly lined up. It won't work. We won't have the housing, and you'll still struggle with the transit. And frankly, this is where new growth is your friend. New housing means new tax revenues coming into your community to help support some of that. And frankly, at least in my community, I think in many others, our development community is stepping up. You don't just get approved for housing without contributing significantly to some of the infrastructure around it, whether it's sidewalks or water and sewer or drainage needs or trees or linkage. There's an effort there to make sure that everyone's got some skin in the game as part of addressing impacts. Why is that really, really critical? Because that's the way you get things done, by working in partnership. And I just implore folks at the local level who are partners and are, I would say, kindred spirits, right, to lean into the work a little bit. And I think it's really hard. The aha moment we had in Salem was when we did, and my friends from Salem will remember this, when we had our housing production plan. Every community needs a housing production plan. It tells you what's happening in your community. Are people getting older? Are people getting younger? Are you having more kids? Are you really impacting the schools? It allows you to do the data collection and analysis on your own community. And, math doesn't have an opinion, right? This is what's happening and how many units, and do we have the right kind of units? And it brings people together to do that. You're not doing it in a back room alley. You're doing it out in front as part of community meetings and coming together. And let's challenge assumptions. Let's better understand, what this information is telling us. And when it's staring you in the face, there's this awesome thing that happens. People start to come together and think, well, maybe we could allow inclusionary zoning to work. Maybe that's a way to get the new housing that we need on some of these leftover and contaminated sites, and housing that serves our community as well. And maybe we can think about if really having green buildings and resiliency is important to us, maybe we can have a little bit more density so we can still get the housing, but we can make sure that it's being developed in a way that's going to serve us well into the future. Those conversations around that data bring up opportunities to solve that housing challenge, because it's not somebody else's challenge when you're in your own community. It's your challenge. And so we're going to work hard to make sure through our Community Compact program that any community in Massachusetts who wants to have a housing production plan, who wants to lean in and do that work, will have an opportunity to do so. I think that is one way to address and tackle some of the smart growth zoning needs that we need, that we need to put in place. This cabinet level secretariat position is really going to try and be a strong partner as we think about housing choice and the MBTA communities law, which we will be implementing and went into effect. If you're not familiar with that, it requires you to have multifamily zoning if you're an MBTA community or an adjacent community. Of the 175 communities it impacts, I think we've only got 2 that right now have participated in the first effort, which is essentially putting together a plan to show how you're going to accommodate the zoning relief. And we had our first community who just passed and adopted an as-of-right multifamily zoning in Lexington. Now, if Lexington can do it, I know others can as well. So we want to work to support that effort. Oftentimes we know that there's a strong desire or a key group of folks in a community who recognize the need for more housing and want to lean into it, but you may not have the technical assistance or, frankly, just enough information to dive in, particularly our smaller communities who may not have fully staffed, robust planning departments. So we want to try and help and partner in those efforts with the technical assistance that you might need. And the last piece is just that infrastructure component. You know, we're making additional investments in programs like MassWorks. We're looking for other ways to think about reducing the cost of housing. There's a lot of housing deals that were permitted and ready to go right now and could get funded at 3% interest rates. Well, now interest rates are at 7%. So when we think about some of the impacts, it's certainly lending, and you know, can we lend money at a lower rate? It's land. The dirt is expensive. It's the lumber, the cost of the building supplies, it's labor. We know what those challenges are. How are we working in concert with each other to try and address them? We have some programming around many of those efforts, and we think this is almost like a moonshot moment when it comes to housing if we want to play catch up and have the type of housing we need in our communities. What's the resource? We have housing bond bills coming up. We have some of the traditional ways, but what's going to be the difference maker that tells communities and working with communities that we've got some funding to help tackle those areas where it's a challenge. The last piece is looking at, and look, there's a lot we could talk about in housing, but you've got a great panel here, so I want to make sure you hear from them. The last piece for us is also looking at public-owned land. I know we talked about Tewksbury Hospital last time we were with each other. There are a number of places that have land that exists that are owned by the state. I was at UMass Dartmouth a couple of weeks ago. Has anybody been to UMass Dartmouth down on the South Shore, right? Yeah. A lot of land, okay? So if I'm coming to your community, I'm probably like looking around like this, but frankly, there are resources, and if we have the land owned by the public entity, we can take down one of those barriers to the high cost of building housing, which is the cost of the land. So we really want to partner with our cities and towns to determine, hey, is there public land? I see members of the Housing Authority here from our Housing Authority Board in Salem. Like we think housing authorities could really add fuel. They already exist. We own a lot of state-owned affordable housing, many of which is hitting their twilight years, I would say, in need of upgrades. So how are we working with our housing authorities to preserve that affordable housing that we have? And as part of that preservation, maybe even adding to it and offering housing across a spectrum. We know that high concentrations of poverty in one place is the way HUD did things many, many years ago. We now know the value of mixed income communities. And so leveraging public land, whether it's owned by the state or by statewide partners like housing authorities or higher ed or other entities like MassDOT or MBTA, are high on our list as a way to try and leverage opportunities within cities and towns. In closing, I just want to say I hope you can hear the passion that we're putting towards this issue, number one, and number two, see the opportunities for partnership. I was a local official. I love having local autonomy. I think it's great that we have 351 cities and towns that every single day bring their unique skill set of, you know, this rich tapestry that makes up Massachusetts. But of all of our local officials and local, you know, communities don't put their hand up for housing, we suffer as a complete ecosystem. And we can't allow that to happen. So we want to partner. We want to find ways to work together on these issues. And we want to understand how we can help you all support the type of housing that we know you need and want in your communities. It's something that we're going to be leaning in on. Please consider the governor and myself a partner in your efforts. There's no bad ideas when it comes to ways we can work together. So please reach out. Many of you are, I consider friends and certainly former colleagues, and know that we stand with you in trying to address this crisis. And it is a crisis. It's key to not only the quality of life that so many of us want to have in our communities, but to the future for our young adults, our grandkids, the folks who we know want to stay in the communities they were born and raised in. So glad to be with you, and looking forward to the work ahead. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll. I'm a little shorter than you are. Okay, that's worse. Okay, can you hear me? All right, great. So thank you again, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll. It cannot be overstated how thrilled we are to have you here today and to have your leadership at the state level. Thank you for your time and your dedication to finding solutions on housing access. Moving on to our next group of experts, you will see a slightly different panel than expected. Unfortunately, Senator Lovely wasn't able to make it today, but don't be discouraged. We have a great panel here to talk through state and local housing policy. So first up, in reverse order, so we have Andrew, actually in the middle, Andrew DeFranza. Mr. DeFranza has served as the executive director of Harborlight Homes since 2007. While some of you may be familiar with Harborlight, if you're not, they develop, manage, and advocate for high quality, service-enriched, and affordable homes for essential workers, fixed-income elderly, disabled individuals, and those struggling with homelessness. Today, Harborlight provides housing for over 650 people on the North Shore, with additional units in development that will more than double its portfolio in the next 3 years, which is absolutely wonderful. I went to one in Beverly last week, and it was beautiful, so I may be applying. Next is Jason Etheridge, down the end here, president of Lifebridge. Over the last 10 years, Jason has led Lifebridge from a $1 million to more than $5 million nonprofit that serves homeless and other vulnerable individuals throughout Essex County. Prior to coming to Lifebridge, he was the Associate Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at the Home for Little Wanderers in Boston. With more than 20 years experience in the nonprofit sector, Jason has a strong commitment to serving those in need, and we definitely see it play out every single day in Salem. And last but certainly not least, we have Eric Shupin. Eric was a late addition, and we are so thrilled that you were here and able to join us on such short notice. Eric is from CHAPA, and I do not have you're going to have to spell out the acronym, I'm so sorry. Eric joined CHAPA in 2013 and leads their state policy work. As part of that work, Eric built consensus across nonprofits, businesses, government sectors to increase access to affordable housing, which is really what we're trying to do here today, so really a great choice. Eric helped draft and pass the 2018 Housing Bond Bill, which is the largest housing bond bill in state history, authorizing nearly $1.8 billion for affordable housing production. And with that, I just want to thank you again for being here today, and I'll hand it over to our panelists.
Thank you so much. We ended the last panel with a question of what needed to change in order to get the housing crisis going in the right direction. I kind of want to swap that, ask you guys, because you are closer to the ground, you are either, you're building, you are helping clients in many different ways. What are the key partnerships that are working for you guys right now? And I guess we'll just start and go down the panel. From a healthcare service or from a homeless services perspective, what's
That's
helping?
a great question. As a social service agency, we would love to build housing. It takes the right kind of partners to do so, especially as a certain size nonprofit that serves homeless individuals. So just in this, I'll embarrass him because he's sitting next to me, the partnership with someone like Andrew and Harborlight Homes is essential for a social service nonprofit to even consider building housing, right? It's an expensive thing to get done, never mind as a nonprofit who is delivering critical services to individuals every day. So for us, again, it's that public, private, peer support that helps us do what we have to do for housing.
Mm-hmm. Where are builders finding partners that are getting these things in the ground, that's breaking ground and getting people inside them, more importantly?
You talk about contractors specifically, or
in the whole spectrum of your section of this puzzle.
Okay. Well, as a sort of part-time non-politician, I'll answer the question you didn't ask, which is the best thing we've done in Massachusetts for affordable housing in the last number of years, and I predict for the next 10, is electing Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll. I know we said that already, but that's certainly going to turn out to be the smartest thing we've done on the housing front. And the original question, Mike? No, I got it.
Well done, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. On the builder side, there are a number of contractors all around the state who are doing the work and that know how to do it, and that's working well. They're having major challenges, as was referenced earlier, with supply chain issues on cost and with labor. Lynn is a big labor city, and we certainly are needing more people in terms of supply and demand, more people in the labor space. Some of that stuff is starting to flatten out a little bit on the supply chain issue. But the actual contractors, I would say it's the amount of labor and supply chain that is causing pain in that space. But there are many good contractor partners who are building the housing.
Great. Eric, same question. What are kind of the most positive aspects of the work you're doing?
Sure. So I'm Eric, and I'm from Chapel Citizens Housing and Planning Association, and our whole purpose, our whole mission is bringing people together and building consensus. We've been doing it since 1967. And I've been at CHAPA for 10 years now, leading the advocacy work. And I don't think there's ever been a better moment in time than right now to take on all of the housing challenges that we've discussed here today, because everyone recognizes that there is a crisis. Business leaders, philanthropic communities, developers, residents, and the people of Massachusetts recognize that there is a problem, and they are bringing that problem to their state officials, local and state elected officials, to their federally elected officials, and everybody is all in on this right now. Everybody is saying we have to do something, and again, I say, the Lieutenant Governor mentioned that moonshot moment. Now is it, because we have the federal government, the federal administration, the president, as well as our congressional delegation and our partners at HUD, who are bringing people together like this. This is the first time in 10 years that I ever remember these series of events happening across Massachusetts. We have a new governor and a new LG who are creating a housing secretary saying, we're bumping this up. This is priority number one. We have a state legislature with leaders like Representative Arciero on the House side and Senator Edwards on the Senate for the Housing Committee, saying we're going to take on big things this session, which will include the largest housing bond bill we'll pass in the state's history, I'm confident, by the end of this session. And we have the local communities who are saying the conversation has changed. It's no longer, how can we stop this, or we don't want this. It's how can we best achieve this for our community? And that's a fundamental change in the conversation that we've seen, saying, okay, we're not opposed to this, but we want to make this happen. We want to do it in a smart way. Let's work together to figure out how to do that. So all those things coming together really means that we can hit that goal of creating 200,000 new homes by the end of the decade.
Great. Thank you for that. Jason, I want to go back to kind of the homeless community in this particular economy. If we look at an inflating economy during a housing crisis after a global pandemic, the people you serve have certainly been through a lot. What kind of changes have you seen, or what are the more stressful aspects of what your clients are going through now, especially when it comes to housing costs and food costs and medical care costs, things like that?
Bit of a perfect storm. There wasn't a playbook for what we went through during the pandemic. But I can tell you, as we sort of sit, and I love this phrase, I'm not, admire the problem. I can tell you what we're seeing as we do that, and we come up with solutions. I know there aren't any perfect solutions, but as we think this through, we're seeing our homeless shelters turn away 50, 60 people a day. We're seeing folks who are vulnerable and untreated and suffering with substance abuse issues and with nowhere to go. Right? So there's not enough, as the Lieutenant Governor said, there's not enough housing. There's not enough market rate housing. There's not enough affordable housing. For the folks that we serve, we need something that is supportive. We need supportive housing. We need to be able to help these folks get to where they have to be next in their journey and support them while they're there. You know, you could empty all of our homeless shelters and put them right into housing. Without support, they're coming back, right? So, you know, what we're seeing is an influx of demand of services, both economically, for economic reasons, both for behavioral health, untreated behavioral health issues. You know, you think of our medical system and where it's gone and how difficult it is to make an appointment for behavioral health. If you're well integrated and have resources, never mind if you're living in an individual shelter, the homeless system. So what are we seeing? You know, we're seeing a lot more people need a lot more help, and it's intense and the acuity is high.
Andrew, pivoting off of what Jason just said about the need for specialized kinds of housing and that can support services in a way, when you're trying to build these specialized units, when you're trying to attract developers or capital to it, what is that like? What are you going through these days? And have attitudes shifted at all the last few years as this has gotten worse?
Yeah, I think as Eric was mentioning, the aggregation of sort of different political constituencies that see the problem and are eager for solutions is new and robust. That does make it more possible. And on the supportive housing side, in terms of the state is funding through the bond bill and other mechanisms supportive housing, and it's now in a particular funding path that's been very effective and useful. The big questions on the supportive side, at least in my view, are two. One is if you're going to run supportive housing, you have to have rental vouchers that are attached to the units because your incomes are going to be very compressed. And in order to preserve and protect the asset and provide revenue for services, you absolutely have to have that. Ken highlighted one of our buildings, Harborlight House, and mentioned how many 30% area median income units there are. All of the units in that building have a rental voucher, and it's for frail, very low-income seniors. That's how it works. So you have to have vouchers. The second thing on the zoning side is you have to have host communities that are willing to cite and support the permitting, which is why the new MBTA law being implemented in 3A is such a huge deal, because now all of the communities in eastern Massachusetts essentially are going to be creating zoning districts for multifamily housing, and that's going to create opportunities to do more. But you have to have a place to put it, and you have to have a way to fund it at the income levels of the people you're trying to help, and then it will work.
Are there any other carrots that the building community, let's call it, are looking for that want more of?
For that kind of housing?
Or in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the carrots are around capital and predictability of permitting. So, as I mentioned earlier before, the two dominant issues for anything, in addition to supportive housing, are going to be, can the developers secure land in a place that they understand how they're going to get it developed? Is it predictable? Is it reliable? This MBTA zoning law is the biggest zoning change we've had in 50 years or more, and we're going to see how that plays out. That's what we need the communities to implement those zones, and that will incentivize the developers to say, we know how it's going to work in community X, Y, and Z. The second thing is around capital, and I appreciated Juana's point earlier about from HUD's perspective and at the federal level, the biggest drivers on is there money available to build. So in the state of Massachusetts, each round that people are applying for funding to the state for, there's about 100 projects that apply and about 25 or 30 that get funded. There's always 3 and 4 times as much demand for the capital that is there. Most of that capital is run through the low-income housing tax credit, which is federal in its origin. The valve that creates the most power on affordable housing production everywhere in the country is that tax credit. So the bigger that pipe is, or the more capacity that's allocated at a federal level to the states for credits, the more housing is going to get produced. Those are the two incentives. Can we build it in physical space? And is there economic capacity to do it when I'm ready?
We've been talking a lot about this MBTA law, Eric, so I'm going to look at you. What is the future of this? What are we looking at as far as municipalities implementing this? I guess, A, what do municipalities need to do to in an ideal world? And B, what can these folks, what can the advocacy community or the governmental community do to make it easier for everybody at the municipal level?
So what is the future?
Your ideal future.
Yeah, and I'll say the future is bright, my friends. The future is bright, and I really do mean that. I'm not a hopeless optimist by any means. Those who have worked with me know that. anytime anything's getting ready to pass or we're doing this MBTA communities, I never thought it was going to pass. I never thought it was going to get signed. I never thought it was going to get implemented. But we have all those pieces now. And so when we talk about the number of homes that we need, and I'll keep on going back to this 200,000 homes that the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, that can seem like a daunting, insurmountable challenge, but the MBTA communities law increases the zoning capacity by over 200,000 homes in eastern Massachusetts. We have the capacity, we have the tools, we have the parts. We just need to bring them together. There are, 2 communities now who haven't met the initial requirement. We have a community, Lexington, who has led the way. And I'll go back to the refrain, if Lexington can do it, anyone can do it. So there's that hope that, this can happen. Now, what do we need to make sure we continue to make progress and move forward? It's technical assistance for communities, I think, is probably the biggest thing that we need. We need to support the communities who are doing this. There are technical assistance programs that are being put into place right now. Mass Housing Partnership has programs. CHAPA, we just brought on someone to work directly with MBTA communities to help communities put together their plans and coalitions. There are regional planning agencies that want to make this happen. And so with partners at the state level who we hope through an Office of Housing and Livable Communities will just take the amount that we're doing right now and just amp that up. Because ultimately, these are the decisions that are being made at the ground level. Again, I'm just going back to things that the Lieutenant Governor said. The state does not build housing. Communities build housing. The state can provide the environment. That housing choice law that passed, the reason Lexington was able to pass their zoning was because they passed it by a simple majority. The way that Salem passed ADUs, simple majority. Those were policies that the state put in place to help communities. And so it's that kind of environment that we need to continue to build and just make better because, again the future is bright. The future is bright.
Jason, when you're looking at expanding the services geographically, if more municipalities are building housing, if they're kind of playing their part more than they traditionally had, how are you expanding yours into maybe some of these suburban cities and towns that haven't traditionally played a role the way that urban centers have?
I think by making sure they understand that we can be a great partner in this process. So it's always it's an interesting algorithm and equation to get affordable housing done for a specific group of people. I happen to represent homeless individuals, right? Not many communities are jumping up and down saying build units for formerly homeless individuals in our community. Well, we have done that, and we do that, and we're doing it again. And it's through working with agencies like Lifebridge. I see a lot of my peers in the audience. There are a lot of social service nonprofits that provide day-to-day services for folks in these units. So I think it's making sure that they understand that we can be a partner in this process and supporting them in their endeavors on the supportive service side.
That's great. Andrew, from the building side, from when you're hearing from your side of the world here, has there been blowback because of the state action, or is this seen as this MBTA law? Is this being seen as a positive? I mean, it's a mandate for more construction, isn't it?
It is. I'm assuming this is being recorded somewhere, so I'm going to think about that. So it is a mandate for more construction. It is brilliant to Eric's point and to the moonshot language that this was passed by a previous administration, and now we're at implementation stage. There have been some communities that have embraced it. There are a lot of communities that are wondering how to do it. But I think the tone, to Eric's point, is, and we're trying to steer it this way as well, is much more around how are we going to do this well to meet our community's needs. And more people are aware of their workers because their employers in the area are struggling to hire. More people, and at different levels than we were seeing before. More people are aware of who provided them core needs during the pandemic, and there still is some residual I would say, sense of where we really did need people to be at the grocery stores and doing takeout and taking care of my mother and watching out for all these different things, and they did it at great risk and at low compensation. So I think at a community level, there are more people that are open to it. There are certainly some that are resistant. There are some that are resistant to just the general idea, this ongoing tension between state influence and local control that Lieutenant Governor talked about. And so we keep trying to push how about we all figure out how to do this better? How about we're all going over here? This is not A versus B or C versus D. This is, we all have a problem and we're all working on solution. And that seems to be effective. And I think what you're seeing, to your previous question to Eric, is you're seeing small constituencies at the municipal level who are deciding to champion how this is going to proceed. And that is critical. You have to have a group of people that have the relational and social and political capital at the municipal level who are helping shepherd this through, because we're going to have to do this 175 times. Right, to approve this. So 1 down, check, 174 to go. And the fact that Lexington went first is also brilliant, because we're going to get mileage out of the line, which is going to be phenomenal. And we could mention the 2 communities that have not filed yet, if you'd like, because neither of them are on the North Shore, and so I don't care. But I think we probably won't.
Great. Well, let's open it up to the audience, and if anybody wants to drag those communities that aren't in the North Shore, please go ahead. But anyone have questions for this panel? No? Okay, well, I'm sure that maybe they'll hang around and you can grab them by the ear at some point. But I want to. Did I miss that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just, as a topic for the panel and speaker, they speak a little bit about veterans housing initiatives, programs, communities that want to use to expand veterans housing.
Sure. Yeah, the question is about expanding veterans housing as we're building more and more. I don't know if anyone wants to take that one.
So I can speak generally just about resources that have gone into veterans housing. I mean, this is something that the federal government really does take very seriously. I mean, there's no more bipartisan issue that I've ever seen when it comes to housing than veterans housing. So there's been expansion of the VASH program from the VA, which provides rental subsidies to veterans. There are dedicated resources to building veterans housing, and in Massachusetts, our state resources that go towards financing affordable housing, there are those resources within the housing bond bill that can be dedicated towards veterans housing. One of the things why we want to pass an even bigger housing bond bill this session is because it goes and supports projects like that. And so those are the resources, and those are the things that are in Massachusetts that I know of. But again, I defer to any of my colleagues, or even HUD or Congressman Moulton, who I'm sure would have much more information on those resources.
Yeah, no, our HUD VASH program serves our veteran population. It's not just about housing, it includes wraparound services. It's actually unique in making sure that people have access to mental health, behavioral health, workforce. So if you know of anyone who is in need of housing and is a veteran, they should definitely get a hold of us, and we can work with communal care and local housing authority where that person resides to make sure that we're getting them on a path to retain services. So that is something we directly do.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Can you just address a little bit your thoughts about the Commonwealth's role in additional assistance to state housing authorities? I think we understand that the federal housing authorities are larger and funded in a different way, but the capacity building and sort of the need to integrate state housing authorities into this conversation.
Yeah, I'll probably take that one. So it's a huge question. Just very quickly, I'm sorry, I just saw her in the background. So just want to congratulate incoming City Councilor Nicole McLean, who's in the back. I'm looking at Buzzy's nameplate here, and Nicole will be replacing Buzzy, and a big loss to the community and a big celebration for Nicole. Her, I think, swearing in is tomorrow night, probably in this room if anybody wants to come. So congratulations. She's a champ. So question around public housing, state public housing particularly. This is actually a huge deal and is going to be a huge deal. We have, as many people know, Massachusetts has one of the largest state-funded public housing portfolios in the country, and it's a lot of units, and most communities have some, even very little more affluent communities, which makes it politically unique, because there are communities that care about it that maybe don't otherwise care about housing, and they care about the people who live in it. So it is an interesting political situation, but we do not have a good plan at the moment for how those units are going to be able to get redone. There was a comment earlier, I think it might have been yours, did you say aging gracefully? What was the one? We're quoting Lieutenant Governor here. Yes, twilight, there it was, twilight years. A lot of that, the physical plant is really deteriorating, and the local housing authorities are very nervous because they can't keep the buildings in good shape, and a lot of them have ADA problems, right? So they're not accessible even though they house a lot of seniors. And so there has been some movement. Big thank you to HUD. We actually just closed last week 221D4 with the Ipswich Housing Authority to redo 94 units on Route 1A. That created a new joint venture utilizing a HUD loan and tax credits to upgrade all of those units. But you're seeing the state has some new pilot activity that's sort of RAD-like, which is to create mixed income communities on state public housing land, and to use that transaction to upgrade the existing housing, and to add some other either market rate or different income tiered housing. This is working. It tends to be working in larger communities with larger portfolios. So the small communities that have really small pools, or where there's a lot of political pressure not to add units, they feel the stress. They want the units to be upgraded, but they don't have the mechanics. They don't have volume, or they don't have enough space or enough political will. So, but you will absolutely, this is going to be an issue until we fix it. And Bill Bronner, who's behind Kim, could probably tell me how many units that is. 50,000, Bill-ish? A little less than 50. So we're going to have to deal. There are some thoughts on having to deal. We have federal models on how to deal. We can do this, but it's going to take some more work.
I don't know if there was one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. This will be the last one, I believe, sir. Sir in the blue in the back. I think he had his hand up the previous time.
Hi, I live in the city of Malden, and it seems like that in my community at least, and a lot of the surrounding communities, there's a conversation of, how can we build as little housing as possible simply to be in compliance or up until recently not getting to 40B status, right? So I guess, what can the state do, or what can we do on a regional standpoint so every single city and town is not recreating their zoning with completely different standards, right? So it seems like, at least in my community and some of the communities I've seen, Malden, Medford, it seems like, we're crafting our zoning, or at least we have it. So it's very hard to build by rights, and then everyone has to come in front of the zoning board of appeals. And I believe the cities and towns use this because they say, well, we can get concessions out of developers, but it's very hard for developers to make plans because small-scale developers obviously are being dragged through this legal loophole of having to go through the ZBA get variances. I guess what can we do on a county or a regional level to set zoning so Malden is not wildly different from Melrose or Everett or Medford or Somerville? I mean, what kind of zoning can we implement to have some kind of a overarching blueprint for the community, for the region, not just city by city?
I can, and I'm looking at Andrew because he's fought these battles. I think probably every single time, almost every single time.
I used to be taller.
Yeah. Around that zoning. I mean, Massachusetts, we are unique in the most wonderful of ways. We do have that long history of home rule, and we are proud of that. It's very, the most basic kind of democracy, but that leads to a lot of different, when it comes to zoning, 351 different zoning codes. At the state level, I mean, we've talked about providing the resources and the technical assistance when it comes to planning. That's absolutely, we need to do more of that. I'll just keep on saying that again. There are policies that we are working on, MBTA communities we want. I mean, that says communities, this is the kind of zoning that you need to put into place. We're not going to tell you where, how, but it's got to be like this. So can we do more of those kinds of policies, statewide? Can we do things like allowing accessory dwelling and saying those can be built by right? We also have laws like Chapter 40R, I mean, we get the 40B, but there's 40R, which is a little similar of here's the kind of zoning you can put in place to build by-right housing. Oh, and by the way, some of it's going to be affordable, but we're going to give you support. The state's going to, give support, direct financial support to communities to put that zoning into place, and then support for the schools when that housing is built. So we have these tools and resources in place. We just need to, have communities know about them, have the capacity to put them in place, and then at the state level strengthen those policies and see what else we can do. Again, because it has to be working in partnership with communities to do it. I would love if we had county governments, zoning and planning, which other states have, but we don't. And I think that'd be a challenge to put into place. But with the new housing secretary, I think this is exactly the kind of coordination and regional planning that office, I hope, when we talk about livable communities, is really going to take on. And so, I'm encouraged.
All right, thank you all for the questions. Thank you to the panel. I don't believe we have any closing remarks, so I guess you're free to go. Thank you again, and thanks to Congressman Moulton's office for putting this on.